Alright guys, so I'm going to do a video that's a little bit different. I wasn't going to do it, but somebody suggested that I should go ahead and do it, so I'm going to do it. Something interesting that I saw here, I don't know if it's like copyright issues or what, I don't think so, I think it's public domain stuff, but this is a comic dealer who I bought from when I was a kid, and I found something that he posted way back here in June of 2000 about, at the time, what was a mystery group known as CGC. And Lee Hester, the owner of Lee's Comics, is writing about it here, and there's a big, long discussion thread between him and some of his longtime supporters talking about this new company called CGC. Starting right off in about June of 2000, which is about 6 months after CGC was officially formed. For those of you who don't know, CGC was officially formed, I think, in January. It was the month of 2000. And yeah, I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to show you just what you're seeing here on the screen. I'll show you some cool comics instead that I picked out that have some really cool covers, and I'll get the lighting right so it's not all messed up. But I'm not going to talk about the comics I'm showing at all. I just picked them out because they're recent ones that I picked up and they got cool covers, but I'm going to talk about what is really interesting in this thread, because basically what's available here is the history of CGC, kind of at a ground level with people who are talking about it as it was happening and as it was developing in those beginning stages, and man, do you learn some interesting information. Alright, here we go. Alright, so I just kind of set up a crude thing here. You're not going to see the whole comic, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But you'll see the majority of the art here. The whole point is to listen to what I'm saying, not what you're seeing. But I just wanted you to have something cool to look at comic book wise while you were hearing my boring voice go on. But the content, what my boring voice will be talking about, I think at least, is kind of interesting. So let's start here with what is originally noted. And I'll try to, I don't want to have to do any editing, but I'll try to cut myself as short as I can here by just skipping to the good parts. But at the beginning, let me just read word for word what it says. I noticed that there's a real craze going on, and remember this is in June 2000, so 6 months after the formation of CGC. I noticed that there's a real craze going on with the slab CGC graded books. If you search on eBay under CGC, you will see over 600 such items. 600, crazy for the time, huh? Holy cow, 600 CGC slab. But think about that, 6 months after the formation of it, to 600 for 600 to be listed at one moment in time on eBay, that's pretty quick growth, huh? Some people put the letters CGC in their listing just to get noticed. Just to get noticed. Even though their book is not even slabbed. Isn't that interesting? God, now it's got such a bad rap, but back then, you know, I mean, it had going for it what it was originally intended to have going for it, which was to be a certified way of buying a book. Whatever that freaking means. But back then, it sounded good. Generally, I note, going back to what it says here, generally I note that the high-grade, unrestored key books certified by CGC are going for record prices right now, sometimes as much as 10 times guide. And now he goes on to list what he thinks at the time were crazy sales for what CGC slabbed books went for. Skipping ahead here, what I think is stranger is the times when more common books are going for a premium just because they are slabbed, even if they are not in high grade. That also, I think, is interesting that he was noticing that even back then, that was a trend. Let me just give you an idea of what he's going crazy about here. In Iron Man #1, CGC 9.8 went for $2,025. The guide price on a near mint copy is $350, and he's just flipping out. You know, at the time that was crazy. You know, but it's just gone even more crazy since then, right? He says it's a common book, Iron Man #1, that is, but to be fair, it's probably quite rare in this high grade. Although another copy in 9.8 went for another $2,000 during the same week in a CGC slab, so who knows how rare it really is. And he's noticing something really important back there. Let me switch to a new cover here. Sorry for the glare, but I got it as good as I could. He's noticing really something really important there, I think, which is that it's hard to know exactly how many copies are out there in certain grades, right? Not everybody's having their books slabbed. There's a lot of, especially old-time collectors, who are hoarding lots and lots of high-grade copies of especially important books. Anyways, sidetracked. Still in the same note here, a lot of good points he's making right in the very beginning. He's noticing stuff here that I think is really amazing that he was noticing it even back then, 6 months after the formation of CGC. He says, there are some outside investors coming into the comics field. It's now much easier to trade in high-grade comics. Outside investors. In other words, there's people coming into the hobby who would not have been there otherwise if CGC hadn't been formed. You have a service whose grading is trusted with CGC. People feel confident that they will not be misled by restoration or overgrading when they buy a CGC sealed book. They can buy through the mail with confidence. That's true. Graded books are likely here to stay, is what he says, 6 months after its formation. He says, where do you think this trend is heading? What type of slabbed books are heading up and which ones will fall in value? Have you bought or sold any slabbed books lately? Let me know. And this starts a very interesting discussion. I'm going to stop it here, and we'll pick up again when I find a good spot to try to splice in some interesting responses from people. But look at what that man is noticing even back then. Either extremely shrewd, or it was just obvious as hell even back then, and people just ignored the warning signs. Look at what he's noticing, guys. It's nuts, no? Nuts. I'm sure I'll get some hate for this video, but it's alright. I don't mind. I think you'll get some good discussion going with people who like talking about this stuff, so let's get it going. Alright, I'm trying to find the good quotes here that were in response to that original post. I'm just going to go in order here. I'll just read the pith of each reply. First response, June 2000. On a related note, I bought a graded CGC X-Men 108 that was an 8.0 grade that I was not very impressed with, so don't just throw caution to the wind because it's been graded by this company called CGC. Very good point. Sorry for the glare, guys. I don't know how bad it's going to be when I finally look at the video, but it is what it is. Okay, next response after that is definitely an interesting one. Enjoy this cover, this interesting cover here. While I read this response, and read this one word for word. I met Steve, I'm not going to say the guy's last name actually, but the CGC primary grader at the time, at the Detroit Motor City Con in May. I saw a very fine 8.0 ASM number 28 and asked Steve to note what, in his opinion, were the main factors that brought the grade down from a near mint. I was not impressed with his response, and I would have graded the book a fine myself. Upon further discussion with Steve, it seems as though he received a lot of flack from the members of the charter with respect to grading too loosely. So even at the start here, sorry I forgot to give you the date, but this is still June 2000, this third response here. So even then, they're saying that they're grading too loosely at CGC. I, for one, have heard that CGC is now grading more strictly from various dealers. If this is the case, do we then have to establish two categories of CGC books, one for initial standards and one for revised standards? Can you imagine back then? You know, they're trying to figure out what's what, man. Like, you know, this company's coming through and they're saying it's CGC certified. Certified, what does that mean? Do we have like early CGC certified now and then like a second CGC type certified? Very interesting to me to read this stuff. Also, he says, if the grading standards are universal, why won't CGC guarantee the same grade on a book if resubmitted? And isn't that the tell-all question? I gotta repeat that. For those of you who haven't really thought about that, think about that, guys. Still the case. Also, if the grading standards are universal, why won't CGC guarantee the same grade on a book if it is resubmitted? Slab, not taking out the slab, still in the slab. Think about that. I mean, sure, you could argue that there could be color fade to it by somebody being sloppy with it, leaving it out, but if those things are kind of excluded and screened out, why won't CGC do that? A couple other kind of interesting things. Furthermore, he says, I know that you would go batty if I had to grade 50 or 100 books a day every day of the week. No one can do it with absolute consistency. Good point, no? I don't care what sort of reassurances CGC gives. I assure you, love this guy, that your perception of a near mint 9.4 or a very fine 8.0 will change during the course of a day if you're grading 100 books. Finally, what happens when these guys are sick of grading and decide to leave CGC? Will their replacements consider a certain defect as having the same impact on a book's grade as their predecessor? The exact same? Yeah. Universal standard, give me a break, he says. Love that response. Love that one. And that's still in June of 2000. I'm going to skip here ahead to the next one. Okay, to be fair, let's read one on the other side of the coin from somebody who, to be honest, I think is a little bit naive, but it's okay. This is an interesting topic, he says. I've been collecting books for 17 years. So I guess naive is not the right word to describe this individual, huh? But listen to what he says. And I have found an inconsistency among local comic dealers when it comes to grading comics, especially high grade. Is CGC good for comics? Sure it is. I would never buy a comic online until now with CGC. Why? Because they are not graded by comic dealers. The dealer wants to make money, as much money as possible, and this leads to a biased point of view. Look at this. As if CGC would not want to make money, and as if that would not somehow bias their point of view on grading comics. And because the path of CGC, sorry, this is me going off my own here now, but because the path of CGC to make that money is a little bit more circuitous and a little bit less direct than is the path of a dealer selling a book in his shop to a buyer, it goes overlooked, right? Even back then, it's hard to see for some people who's trying to figure out what's going on. It's understandable, but man, whew, I wish I could just go back in time and tell this guy, like tap him on the shoulder and be like, hey dude, like, you sure about that? Anyways, he says, the dealer wants to make money, as much money as possible, and this leads to a biased point of view. CGC is not biased in that way. I would like to appreciate it if comic dealers were given training and there was a standard, some sort of certification when grading comics. I've gotten away with buying high-grade comics because they're often graded higher than they should be by the dealer. In fact, CGC is the wave of the future. Jesus, this guy's in love, huh? Oh my god, okay, and then he's attacking the original poster. I think I'll skip over that one and go to the next one. Interesting. Next person here, and this is in January, much later now. No, I'm sorry. March of 2003. So 3 years later is when we're skipping ahead here in the thread. Nobody replies for 3 years. And the next one says, next guy here says, skip to the good part here. Once the speculators realize, so at this point there's speculators in the game, right? CGC's been around for 3 years, and yeah, they're around even then. Once the speculators realize they're never going to see that money they spent on books like Crabman #1, Crabman #1, they're going to get upset and stop using the CGC service. I think in a few years we will see CGC go the way of the comic glut of the mid-1980s to 1990s. Oh, man, that is not the case, my friend. That is not what happens in the future at all. But wouldn't that be interesting if that is what had happened? I'm going to go ahead here and skip ahead. Okay, let's pay attention to this gentleman right here. I'm just going to read what it says. Just reading somebody else's opinion here, people. I think that CG, and this is in September of, oh, this is weird, sorry. We've gone out of order here chronologically. Damn it. Okay, well, we're back to the year 2000. This is in September of 2000, so 9 months after the formation of CGC. I think that CGC is just a new way to inflate the comic market. Much like what happened during the late 80s and early 90s, this company is trying to say that the books they grade are worth sometimes 10 times more than guide price. This is insane, and the people are willing to buy into it, I'm afraid, are in for a fall. Just X-Men #1, Spider-Man #1, Youngblood #1, all these other books that we can often find for less than guide. I don't know about X-Men #1. Maybe back then you could. Damn, man. That hurts me. That hurts me to hear that. X-Men #1 for less than guide. Or even the quarter bin. The quarter bin? I don't know. The quarter bin on X-Men #1? This guy's in love his rocker. We're supposed to pay for our home. CGC books 2 will be a trend that was supposed to guarantee riches and result in a few lucky people making a pretty penny and many more losing their collective shirts. I'm sure that the industry will be worse off for this new trend that is inflating comic prices and creating a new buyer's market. It doesn't help the comic stores, the comic companies, and it probably won't help you unless you want to pay 10 times more for that Secret Wars #1. Ooh, a little weak there in the middle, but a nice comment. Skipping ahead to the next. Okay, next comment here. December of 2000, almost 1 full year after the formation of CGC. People are starting to form their opinions. Seasoned collectors are starting to get an idea what CGC is and what it will become. Let's listen to this guy here. December of 2000. In theory, a professional, unbiased grading company sounds like the end of all our grading problems. I have bought many comics via mail order only to find out my opinion of Near Mint differs from other people's. However, in practice, the CGC is turning out to be a disaster. First, CGC is dependent upon the larger mail order services for a huge portion of their income. Think about that, guys. Think about that. It is in their best interest, to grade as high as reasonably possible to assure their customers make a nice profit themselves. I know the people of CGC come with great reputations, but if your paycheck is dependent upon you grading an Action Comics 1, at least a VF, when in reality it's no more than a fine, Can you seriously believe that you may not be swayed to overgrade even a little bit, even subconsciously? Second of all you have to do is check out the insane prices being paid for comics that are barely worth mentioning in the price guides. It's the early 1990s speculation madness all over again, people. This cannot last long and cannot possibly be good for the long-term health of the comic industry. Well, you're right about the second part. Last, what happens when a rival company is formed by people who have even better reputations or are better known and respected? Oh, look at this. A premonition of CBCS and others to come, huh? And remember, this is in December of 2000. I can see this happening very soon. The CGC company is making too much money grading comics for someone not to want a piece of the action. What happens then? Whose grading standards do you then accept as being better? What happens when a third or fourth grading company starts up? We are right back to the same mess we have now with the old eyeballing it system. Do I have the answers? No. Just a lot of complaints, but I wish I did. Man, is that not interesting stuff. Skipping ahead here, only a couple more. All right, last one here, and this one is from July of 2001, so we are now 1.5 years after the initial formation of CGC, and this is a relatively harsh one. I'm just going to read it, and then I'll just kind of cut off at the end, I think. I don't want to really add my 2 bits. I just wanted to share pieces of what other people, and these are not just dumbasses. These are, well, they could be dumbasses, but they're at least dumbasses who know a lot about comics. These are guys who have been longtime collectors, most of these people who are commenting. Let me just read this last one, and that'll be that. Love this cover. When CGC first started up, he says, it seemed like it was a chance for the standardization of grading for rare items, because the prices for older issues had a larger range between grades and grading tended to be more subjective. It could have been a good idea. Newer issues never seemed to be a problem. However, the thought of catching mild restoration seemed appealing. I was initially open-minded about CGC. However, I walked into a shop the other day and saw a bunch of $10 by guide issues, mostly from the 1990s, CGC'd and priced at $20 to $30. The number of 1980s and 90s issues that are starting to be CGC'd is ridiculous. This is back in 2001, guys. People who are getting into comics as an investment should best beware. Put your money someplace else. Collectibles are only worth what somebody else is willing to pay, despite what guide says. Between CGC and the recent comic book movies, such as X-Men, Spider-Man, etc., this is in 2001, remember, the values have artificially inflated. Oh man, if you only knew what was to come. I remember the 1980s, when high-grade back issues were a commodity, and the first Batman movie fueled prices. Remember Dark Knight Returns #1 first print at $60 to $80 at one time? Isn't this funny? However, I also remember the comic collecting fad wearing off for many, which put most comic book shops out of business. I remember people who had bought books on speculation trying to off them and getting laughed at for the prices they wanted. That is also true. It's true. I mean, his thinking, you can understand why he's thinking the way he is. And I'm going to leave it there. But I just wanted to make a video that highlights a lot of what I've been thinking about lately from some people that I've been talking to who know a lot more than I do about comics and the history of comics books and the history of the comic book industry. And I think if you think about CGC and where it started and what it was at the beginning and how it became what it is now, it's a useful thing to think about. It might affect what you're willing to pay for your next slabbed book. Maybe not. Maybe not. And hey, you know, I mean, you guys know I have tons of slabbed books, tons of CGC books, but I think it's important to keep it all in perspective. Yeah, and we'll leave it at that. Call it a biased video if you want. Just reading some opinions.